Hi, everyone. It's with great pleasure that I have with me today Jennifer Genest, who is my dear partner, friend, and someone who's inspired me for many years now with her ability to be very resourceful. She never seems to want help, but always wants to work things out for herself, and that makes her a very independent person. And so, one of the things that really inspired me about Jennifer was that she built her own house. And since living on our property, she's done amazing things to make the place more independent. And uh, one of my passions was always to become independent and live eventually off grid. And I have reason to desire this because living on this property for the last 20 years, there's been periods where we've had either floods or fire or bad weather that's just caused us to have power blackouts where we have no electricity. Without electricity, we can't pump water. So, and then without, sometimes power, we can't go out. In the last year, there's been all the COVID lockdowns where we couldn't even leave the house. And so I've often wondered what would happen if there was no power, no electricity, no petrol. How would we live? And I've been making baby steps toward preparing for a situation like this all my life. And I've made some progress, but Jennifer's been very inspiring. And I've always been trying to get her to share her information. And just recently, I bought this book by John Venezia, who I think is a great speaker. He's got a great channel. And I just gave it to Jennifer, and I think it maybe re-inspired her to think about it. So I'm going to hand over to Jennifer, and she's going to talk about her ideas and also maybe share a bit of the ideas that are in this great book if you want to buy it by John Venezia. So Jennifer, thank you very much for being here today. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we begin?
Yes, exactly. Like I've been super passionate about this way of living, and in the past, I have built a beautiful 1552 square foot, beautiful bungalow, attached garage, a house back in Canada with my ex once before, and we literally built it from scratch, from blueprint. And so that was in itself an experience of a lifetime. And although that was phenomenal, it was still considered in the system. We still were part of we had a builder's mortgage, so there was a lot of ties to the system. And so even though that was a great experience, now at a point in my life now, I want to work towards building a more sustainable life where you're completely independent and not relying on the system like hydro and paying into taxes and a mortgage and that. So as Simon mentioned, he got this book and I've read it through, and it was super, just really, really adorable and cute, and just had all of the essential information. And so I took this book and created a presentation out of it. And this is now what I'm going to be presenting to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I look forward to hearing this. Over to you.
Thanks, Simon. Just to give a little history about me, I've built a house once before, and it was an amazing experience. This was back in Canada. And however, though, when I look back on it, it was done through a builder's mortgage. And as daunting as it seems, it was something that I accomplished. I think it's almost everyone's dream. And however, though, I think that at this point now, I'd almost want to redo this experience in a much more different way. And so I'm going to begin to present some material that kind of goes in more of an alternative way of living. So Simon, I need to change slides. Okay. Okay, all right, to start. So surrendering the idea that debt is a necessity. When we actually look at the word mortgage, if you look it up, it means debt. So when we look at the way that the system runs right now, we have mortgage, it's either you're paying rent or you're paying into a mortgage. And so when we actually look at, because of the interest rates, when we actually look at what it takes to pay this off, half the time we're spending 25% of our life trying to earn a living to pay it off, which is our time spent and our energy when it comes down to it. And then looking at consuming is such a plague and such an infection, how when we look at this idea that's out there that we apparently need all these things, and really when we're putting money into supporting these larger platforms, we are, not spending time supporting the more smaller businesses and this. So consumerism, I'll talk a bit later. And then looking at this idea, credit cards versus cash. When we spend money using a credit card, oftentimes we don't really see the value in it. It becomes just this quick transaction that we put through. Whereas when we have cash, it's money that we almost value more because it's money that we've earned, we've worked hard for it. And as we do that exchange, we actually see the value in it more. This is a psychological thing that has been known. And then, of course, looking at vehicle leases, by the time you pay into the vehicle, it depreciates. So this is when you're buying a new vehicle lease. And then, of course, petroleum. We're now supporting big toxic industries. And there's other means of spending our energy or this sorts of things. So I'll go into that a bit later. But in the end, when it comes down to it, what I'm trying to get to is that the interest rates can be so high and it just becomes this unethical lifestyle where we're just finding ourselves in destructive habits, basically slave laboring 2/3 of our life. And then, by the time, 30 years in, the bank gives you full possession of your home. But by then, how is your body? How is your lifestyle? How do you even have the energy to actually live the life that you want to live? By then, are you actually going to receive this, because you're working so hard for something now, not living in the present moment? We may not be taking care of our bodies in this way. So it leads to physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual stress, illness, marital issues, unfulfilled soul. And then, of course, I'll go into detail about agriculture and how it depletes the soil of nutrients when we're living in this way. So moving on, the idea is we want to look at what's left for you. Who are we really working for? Our survival is based on paying these institutions. And we have been conditioned to believe that in an early education that this is necessary in our lives, that we cannot survive without this system. And the reality is, no, there is little need to spend and borrow money, loans, and yes, we can produce our own food, power, and build our own home. And here's just a diagram just showing that really in the end, it's all about energy. So you're either conserving energy or you're spending it, and just looking at that, the essentials are the land, the energy, the water, all that kind of feeds into each other. Okay, so how we want to really live. This independent living model has no bills. So the idea is that if everyone had 5 acres of land, we can purchase or contract. The main thing is we want to first look at the location and the community that is around us. Because, you could live like a hermit if that's what you want, but the idea is when we have a big community and everyone is supporting each other, this is where we can thrive. So sometimes people might have land, some people might have resources, somebody might have too much of one thing, but when we all come together, we can then offer what we've got and work together in this way. So we can look at Indigenous caretakers of the land. They've got the wisdom, and that's something that we could use. There's the elders, there's the retirees. Maybe there's people out there that have land who just don't even know what they want to do with it. And if they had people come to them to offer, I could build something on your land, and they would probably be really excited and keen to do that. So it's about connecting and networking at this point. Maybe there's some people out there that have land, and maybe they're in destitute, especially what's going on in the world right now, that maybe people are at the brink of losing their property. And if someone had come to them and offered them a contract or a deal or an investment or help, then maybe they could conserve that land instead of selling it and giving it away, and instead having a community of people working together to all having to basically meeting their needs and what they need at that time in their life. So there's things like building tiny homes. As your family grows, there's building add-ons that you can do as well. There's things like using the natural resources, so building a fence that's actually, or a hedge, like using material as opposed to a fence. And then in this way, you can live longer, healthier, happier, accessing your pension and your super and your investments, because you'll live longer and healthier in this way. So looking at all we really need, what we really need is nature and the elements, fresh air, sunlight, rays from the sun, pure, accessible, distilled drinking water, earth, metal, rock, fires and trees, appropriate temperature, we need to be warm, protection from the elements, whether there's wind, rain, snow, excessive sunlight, these types of things we want to consider. And then in the end, really, we just need a place to sleep, eat, drink, and upkeep an inspiring environment to do the things that we love. So that's like really doing things that are soul-driven. And spending leisure time, movement, meditation, learning, and work. So in order for us to be sustained and living our dreams, we want to always be constantly learning. This is our essence of who we really are. And then doing work that we can be proud of. And then, of course, the mind-body connection. So movement, meditation, as long as we can take care of our minds and body together and spending time doing even nothing, these are the main things that we really need. It's about what we need, but not necessarily what we want, what we're meant to believe we need and want. Then I just have some cute, quotes here. One is, Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed. And a diagram, again, looking at giving back to Mother Earth as we take. So Mother Earth is a living organism too, and so thinking about loving and honoring and respecting her, as well as looking at this diagram in the top right, how we can have 5 acres. And if you look at that, it's quite an amount that you could definitely sustain growing a vegetable garden and all the things, which I'll talk about later. Okay, and then again, Motherland Movement. So choosing a community of like-minded people before buying land, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is the first step is really networking and finding a community. I think that's really important when it comes to the location of where we want to live. There are some places that are offering land for free. They might not be the most desirable places, but this is something that we can take into consideration if finances are not available. And then, of course, making sure that you're living in a forest and that there's a pond of water. So making sure that we have those resources. Water is something we need, obviously. And just knowing that it really is possible to spend not too much on land. There are ways. So looking at this is about researching and looking at. Then, of course, when we've found the foundation of land where we want to grow upon, is looking at legal building permits, access right away, being careful of subdivision, these types of restrictions. However, some of these might be appealing to you. And then looking at real estate online search applications. So this is another way to just kind of look at what's out there, where's the market. And considering, like I mentioned before, forests, covered mountains, maybe you want to live more in a desert valley surrounded by a body of water. So looking where there's well access. So again, finding people who know about this and networking. Carefully considering a floor plan. So this blueprint of the dwelling. So the idea is to be building from scratch. And in that way, then you can place strategically how your home's going to be, facing north or south, this type of thing. Buying and so the other option is buying with a small group of friends, investing in a nice property with instant like-minded community, obviously is what you'll be attracting. So you can all share and contribute. And then I just have some images of showing that your home and how it could be a sacred space. Looking at the time where we are in this world where, now working from home. There's these COVID restrictions. So in the end, is where our home is sort of where we want to create a space where we're feeling good and really inspired about the work that we're doing. So this is something that we can focus more on. All right, so now moving into the alternative customized homes that are offered. And they can actually be quite luxurious. This is not about living in a tent or living off-grid where we're, going back to living in a dirt home. That's not what this is about. So it's also looking at the new technology that's out there. So the first section I just have is looking at considering sacred geometry. So structurally sound buildings. So things like the pyramid, these have the structure, the dimensions can have healing properties. So that's something you can look into. The magnetic energy field, so the ley lines on the grid of the earth, those are some things to consider. There's these beautiful geodesic domes that are assembled easily, that provides nature's most resilient structures. Ready to move manufactured log homes, but just be careful about avoiding financing altogether. There's homes like Santa Fe Adobe style homes you can look into. There's these beautiful earth ships that are made, this by Michael Reynolds, who's an architect. So what he's done, you can look him up if you look up on YouTube, Garbage Warrior. So what he's done is he's built these homes. He started them in Mexico. He's expanding now into Australia and different areas of the world as well, where most of it is resources, like waste resources. So taking old tires, filling them with soil, stacking them up like you would bricklayering of a house, and then using stucco for the front, for the exterior as well as the interior. And it might not sound appealing, but when you actually look at the images of these homes, they're actually quite beautiful, and they're also quite structurally sound in a way that, if there was an earthquake, they're quite solid. So I'll show you some images of them later in the presentation. And they're quite affordable as well. So the idea here really isn't also about cutting corners. We want to build structurally sound buildings so that they last forever. And there's less maintenance. This is the idea. And then, of course, building underground with windows facing on the south side for ventilation, having a root cellar to store foods. So these are the things to consider as emergency, cans and food preserves and jars from your garden. Some of the resources I have here listed you can look up is Shelter, the Good House book, Google, and friends who are in the trades. And that's the idea, is that when I built my house with my ex at the time, you wouldn't believe, people would ask like, oh my God, how did you do something so daunting? We joke all the time, we'd say, oh, we Googled it, because the reality is that we really just did that. We looked online, we found people who were working in the trades, and as we got progress payments from the bank, we worked with them and did phases of the build, from framing to the drywall to this or that. And as we completed the phases, we would then outsource friends that worked in the trades and then worked along them. So we also learned from them as well. And so it might seem daunting at first, but it is quite achievable. And once you get into the rhythm of things, one thing leads to the next, and it's quite an adventure and something worth doing. It really will empower you. All right, so other building tips: energy efficient home floor plans. So considering, again, like the external environment, which I talked about, so knowing where your body of water is, that type of thing, because water is obviously the most important thing. Considering using native materials that are available on the land. So as we're taking from the land, we also want to think about how we can give back. So that's always this is the idea to consider as well. So there's, using local pine trees for the frame, wood or stone, incorporating it, also being playful and creative. So having fun, enjoying this experience is the idea as well. Having potentially a camping trailer on a concrete foundation floor. So even things like, as you're building, maybe having people come along and live in a trailer on your property, so they can, in exchange for staying there, they can also work on your property as well, and also exchanging ideas and sharing information. So having a wood-burning stove and a fireplace, I think, is essential. And then I just got listed some things like having an RV sandwich between two conventional pre-manufactured built rooms. There's always ways of adding on and building as your community grows or as your family grows. Greenhouses, great, another nice way to heat up the home. Sometimes people have greenhouses sort of in the corner of the side of their house. This is letting light and warmth in all day long, soaking into the concrete, and then that heat is radiating upwards to, that's the in-floor heating system that you can use to then warm your greenhouse. Other ideas are having 55-gallon tanks filled with water, and this is also heating from the sun rays to act as a thermal heat storage throughout the day and night. And then I have here just some diagrams showing the solar panels. So having these solar panels, they come in with the sun. Through this, you get an inverter. It creates the alternative current. So that's some diagrams you can have a look. We'll send this presentation. We'll have this keynote presentation available so that people can look at the details. And we can put that on the membership site. So I won't go into too many details, but that'll be available to you. Okay, how to harness water. So we've got, filtering water to parts per million for drinking water is a key thing. So just watching out for power plants. We don't want to have water waste storage and or areas of energy exploration due to pollutant locations, which could compromise the purity of the water that's in your area where you're living. Looking at the rivers and streams are enough to filter and store seasonal needs in a large tank for distilling. Using compost toilets or installing a camp trailer toilet is our option. Earth's fresh artesian water wells. So if there's no water source, this can be one way of satisfying that. So rainwater harvesting from the sky by gathering every inch of participation from the roof surface as it rains or snows, collecting by gutters that flow into 600-gallon holding tanks. So using that for shower, garden, laundry, etc. So really being wise about the water usage. All right, so this is a really amazing thing. I haven't tried this yet, but it's something I want to do. So this is how we can distill water. So if you take a plastic bottle, for instance, turn it upside down, cut the top off, you can fill this with a cloth to hold back carbon and let the purified water through, activating carbon to remove contaminants and impurities utilizing chemical absorption. So there's different grades of sand and gravel that are used here. And so imagine, I'd almost prefer to do it with a glass bottle. So if this can be done on this small scale, just imagine what could be done on a larger scale. And then here I've got an image of how we're collecting rainwater into a collection tank and so on. Okay, so looking at food sources. So natural organic food produced by yourself, family, and community. Again, I think we could pretty well almost grow food anywhere around the world. You might be a bit limited. I had a garden in Canada, and what I did was I grew things like carrots and beets and garlic and herbs and potatoes and these types of things. And then at the end of that, when we'd harvest it, I would can stuff and that I could use over the winter. And so pickling pickles and asparagus and these types of food. So it is possible. So just kind of looking at what trees are growing and looking at what you can grow. And I think that we're not really optimizing and maximizing what we can really grow in the world. So these are some things to look at. So the most ideal would be growing a vegetable garden, fruit and berry trees, and doing regular soil nutrition rotations. In your compost that you have for your garden, adding mushrooms and leaves and these types of things to create diversity is the most important thing when you're having an organic compost to use for your garden. So it's all about rotating. It's all about adding different elements. Potash from your fireplace, so using the ash to put that into the compost as well. planting fruit and fruit trees, like I mentioned, drying them, canning them, gathering and storing nuts. You can have maple syrup production with your maple trees. Root vegetables are almost quite easy to grow almost everywhere around the world. I think I've covered mostly everything about food in this. Okay, and just more details. So wheat and its kernels can be ground into flour to make sourdough bread. Rice can be grown in 5-gallon buckets by overwatering, thus creating a micro swamp land. Lettuce grows hardy. Often sprouting is a great option. Having a kombucha available. Dandelion. Okay, so we've got dandelion growing, and people are pulling these weeds out to the max and throwing them away. But I believe our earth provides for us, and the reason they're growing is because it's something that we need. Actually, dandelion is it's a liver detoxifier, and you can roast them and make essentially like a coffee. It's just as good and delicious. You can even also do this with honey as well, which I haven't done yet, but it's something I'm going to explore. Okay. So then, having your own chicken coop, your rooster and hens producing your own eggs. So again, that's also quite nice. And then knowing where your food is coming from is such an empowering thing. You're feeding your chickens and hens seeds and allowing them to roam, being wild, and then knowing where your food is coming from is really, really empowering. So the idea is to become empowered and independent from this failing system where corporations are just seeking only to profit from our independence and selling us things that we don't actually need. And the food that's now on the market and on our shelves are so processed and absolutely completely depleted of nutrients and vitamins, on top of filled with hormones and antibiotics. When we look at the meat industry, it's so inhumane and unethical that it's, if people knew more about what goes into processing this, less people would be wanting to eat meat. Now, I'm not saying necessarily there's anything wrong with eating meat or eggs, but it's just the way that the industry is, how it's all about efficient, coming up with money, profiting, that less of caring about how the animals are cared for. If you look into some documentaries that maybe I'll list out later, will really give you insight into that, and it might actually make you feel less inclined to support those industries. So ideally what we want to do is eating fruits and berries off our own trees that we're growing. And if you are going to eat meat, it's just about taking steps. It's not, if you're going to be buying off an organic local farmer, I would be more inclined to do than choosing from our local grocery store, mainstream local grocery store. Okay, so moving on. Now we'll look at reusable waste mimic. Okay, so the idea is when we want to be creative and come up with ideas, we kind of always can look at nature. Nature is a perfect example. And so some things that I've listed here that we've got is composting toilets I've talked about, looking at the septic systems. One thing I would consider, I've had a septic system in Canada. One of the things that I think we overlooked was it freezing. And so we need to have an isolated septic system so that way the pump constantly runs and you don't have that overburden or back sewage into your house. David Bloom wrote, Alcohol Can Be a Gas, outlines principles of turning all plant fiber material into alcohol to use as fuel for power generation. Cattails loves raw sewage, as does asparagus. Willow trees, that was in Canada, that's what I noticed. Just another note here, Henry Ford's first vehicle ran from plant-based fuel or alcohol, but was forced to convert to petroleum. Gasoline is nothing more than toxic petroleum-based alcohol. So again, we just have to kind of look at consciously, where are we spending our money? How is it being consumed? And really just consciously acknowledging where we're putting our energy towards, and feeling good about when we do spend our dollar, where is it going? So this is something I really want to emphasize on. So moving into, so here are some diagrams. So I'm just on the left here showing how powerful nature is, how just consuming that image right there of what looks like a car pile up. And then to the right, here's an example of a greenhouse and a garden. And the top left is an example of one of these earth ships made by an architect. So you can see that the inside, it's made of, like I mentioned, all waste products like tires. But in the end, the outside, the exterior, it's got the beautiful, it's beautiful. That's one example. There's many others that are there. So if you look up earth ships, you can find out on your own. All right, so moving to the next slide here is off-grid power. So I think one of the main things that is the most productive is the sun. The sunlight provides for us. It's just magnificent. So having solar panels on our homes, and then the things you can invest in that come along the way. So needing the charge controller, the AGM batteries, and then the inverter as well. But once you've invested in this, you've got them, and then they're available. And when you look at the benefits in the long run, you will be downsizing what you're paying monthly on, say, hydro bills. And the idea is then there's other options that you can have. So I mean, some days aren't sunny, so and it is quite effective midday, even when it's cloudy. But you could also have wind and water generators and turbines. We can have these gas generators as well, which is can be reliable when your electrical power fails, which happens. So it's not necessarily about completely being off-grid. The idea is to slowly just make incremental movements to sort of empower yourself to feel that you are sustainable, and that way you can move towards this. But it doesn't mean that you have to completely close off ties. We can take, this is the information age. So take advantage of the technology, take advantage of what's out there. But it's just also understanding that, let's say if the internet did shut down, let's say that these solar panels were no longer available, or, so it's about having a variety of resources available to you. So that way, in the end, if say there was, a drastic change in the world, that you've got your resources. There's no living in that fear or once we lose our physiological needs and that we become living in fear, which then just completely spirals down. So there's these beautiful they're called sun ovens. So look those up, sun ovens. They basically, they reflect the sun's rays and can actually cook your food between 300 to 400 degrees. I believe that's Celsius. You can use safe burning candles, so just keep in mind using maybe soy or beeswax, ethical beeswax, of course, because some burning candles can be toxic, and if you're enclosed in your house, that's something to consider. And also, it just, when we look at darkness triggers release of melatonin, so when you have our natural antioxidant repairs the body as we sleep, and artificial light can actually shut off that natural release, tricking the body. And then we can get sicker. We're not feeling as rested when we wake up. So natural light, a flame, fire is a nice way to provide us light in the most natural way without compromising our system. So the idea would be then, you can have your generator, you can have your solar panels, you can have and it's kind of, predominantly you want to rely on the sun as a form of energy, but then you've got your generator as a backup. And just looking at, at a system where you have those reserves, but ultimately you're going to try and rely on the most natural resources. All right, so then again, so the most important thing is having the community. As people come together, I think we know this, is that as people come together with a common goal, this is where great things are possible. Trying to be alone, the way that the world works right now, where everyone's segregating, pulling apart from each other, everyone's trying to become independent, having their own apartment, their own place, their own home, doing everything. This is good. They got this, this facade that makes it look like that's the greatest way of being. But no, back in the day where we used to have communities where there would be, everyone would do their part and support each other. And so I'm not trying to encourage that we go back to how we were once, but it's more like continuing that beautiful, looking like when you look at an example of the ecosystem, everything is feeding each other and working with each other. And that's the idea. So just always considering, if you are ready to purchase land or get involved in this, considering where your community is. And of course, you want to have the like-minded group of people that you resonate with. So again, some ideas: having community gardens, parks, gathering points for recreation, learning, workshops, and leisure, including sacred traditional fire ceremonies, under the full moon, musical jams, singing, dancing, playing, laughing, sharing circles. So this could be just a nice way to really get back into healing ourselves through some of the traumas that we're going through in this time. And then really everybody, imagine people wanting to build some skills and being able to share that and offering that with other people in the community. So there's great benefit out of this, where we can share ideas, come together. And then again, there's no obligation for the community. Once the infrastructure is complete, at that point, participants can either volunteer or base one's use on the community commodities. You can exchange and offer services, teach and share gifts and talents. This is the idea. Now, of course, as we know, political things, when people come together, sometimes there can be problems. And so the idea is, before doing this, making sure that there's a contract, essentially. So everyone signs into a contract that is agreed upon well in advance, that represents the values of the community. And I believe that when we do that, there should be less of any issues, less of any political complications. And, these things happen, but I believe that when you have this contract, it sets the tone, and everyone, if you're not happy with it, don't get involved. If you are into it, then you get involved. All right, so moving on. Okay, so facing the reality. So here it is. So basically, we're looking at corporations control media to manipulate consumers. And we see this even in the school system and the government as a whole. Proof of corporate power when pharmaceutical companies drug kills thousands, and the people who are responsible for this don't go to jail, but instead they make new drugs. So in my experience, not just saying this out of, regurgitating something I read or saw, but I've worked for the University of Manitoba. And I've seen in our department where there was researchers who, even students, so like these beautiful, excited, intelligent PhD and master students that are interested in doing, ready and willing to just throw out their time to study and research, and then later find out that their research experiments have to be in line with their supervisors' ideas, and the supervisors' ideas are based upon the funding. And so the funding that is needed to conduct these research is based on the drug company's limitations. So instead of doing an experiment that should essentially be wide open, instead it's limited in a box. Okay, so you need to prove these tests and make sure that there's, so it's very limited and based on what the drug companies want you to create. And so the funding won't even be provided if there's, say, an idea of this research being put out there that will then appease their desires and wants. So really it's a biased, it's not even an experiment. It's a complete trial that is based upon a limited box, essentially. And this is kind of how we're living now, is living in a box. So we want to kind of expand that and look at living outside of those four walls. So looking at, getting away from, I think there's lots of people out there that are wanting to get away from this 9-to-5 job that is not really so fulfilling, and looking at, there are options of paying less for producing better quality stuff on your own. This is the reality. And then your time spent making money, and all of your money is spent paying bills. And then does this not sound like living like a slave, really, in disguise? So the more that we continue to support companies that have the interest in only profiting, we're only going to continue to keep going on this direction. But if we step back and really reevaluate where we want to put our money, and if we start investing and putting our dollars towards the small local companies who are actually caring about the environment, the community, and have everything in place, those are the people that I would want to support. So it comes down to energy again. Where is your energy being spent? Okay, so moving on. So just a cute little quote from Buddha: desire is the root of all suffering. So again, really, what do we need? Not so much what we want, but when we have what we need, we actually do end up getting what we want. So I have this little note here: stop consuming and start creating, because we are all beautiful, creative. Creativity is our essence. Everyone wants to create. This is who we really are. So just simple solutions now is stop supporting the big platforms. Stop paying for basic survival. If we could cover our essential survival, then we wouldn't be living in fear, and then we can build off that and start being creative. But if we're constantly living on this low level, this low vibration, then it's just going to perpetuate and continue the way it is right now, which is a failing system, is how I see it. Only profiting a short amount of people in the world, like a 5%, and the rest is basically suffering and not living to their highest potential, is how I see it. So a life of independent living will free yourself and ultimately the world, because as you start to begin to live a certain way, it's going to inspire others. It's going to start collectively changing the consciousness of the greater whole for the world. So freeing up your money and time to enjoy life now, not later. So when we live in the past, we're depressed. We're living in the future, we're worried and living in anxiety. So when we're living in the now, we can really take those time to even still living in a luxury home and taking care of our health and our leisure time and having that. So when we're living happy and enjoyable, we will be exuding that and radiating that out into the universe, which is going to be coming back to us and also changing our surroundings and everyone around us. So then this idea of just doing what is really right, as opposed to what you think everyone else is doing. So really listening, really to your heart when it comes down to it, is listening to what feels right for you. What do you feel like? So getting more in touch with ourselves. And enjoying the simple living. So finding a formula that has supported man since the dawn of time, really. And you can spend less by producing better quality essentials on your own. We know this. And again, yes, getting away from the 9-to-5 corporate job that is, again, only supporting the corporate profits and less supporting you as a human being. So we have the birthright, really, to live a productive life that is soul fulfilling. So what can we do? Again, I emphasize the support. When we have a support system and just doing it now, this is the key. So we are in the information age. So what does that mean? Take advantage of communicating across the world. I'm in Australia right now, and I'm always conversing with my Canadian, that's where I'm born. So with my friends and family out there, and expanding and growing. And so take advantage of the technology, do the Zoom calls, put out Facebook groups, off-grid living, and see how many people you can find that are interested. And then, the more that you have that, the more you're going to feel supported and empowered. And like I've been saying, this is the necessity, I think, to build off of. So connecting, collaborating, networking with people, sharing ideas, navigating, finding out what people need and want, and filling those needs. So this is how we can find solutions to the common problems that are out there. Again, researching, putting out online ads. You wouldn't believe if you put out an online ad, just even, even on Facebook, and see how many people are attracted, who you'd be surprised at other people out there that are thinking along the same lines as you, want the same thing, but without putting it out there, you're not going to get anything back. So meditating, seeking that intention, searching, mingling at community events. So I know there's restrictions now with a lot of what's happening now. So again, taking advantage of the resources that we've got, speaking up, having a daily journal, meditating. You wouldn't believe how meditation can be so powerful. Our thoughts are things. So as we think, as we speak, being careful with the words we use. And then our actions as well. So all of this comes into play. Have a vision board. These are some ideas you can start getting. So it's not really about jumping the gun. It's about just taking baby steps. And then, of course, teaching the younger generations, because when children are born into something, that's all they know, right? So when they're born into something, that's all they know. They just think this is the norm. But think about the generations above and beyond, like us and even higher. We need to take that wisdom down to them and show them a better world, or show them where we've come from. And then they can have an informed decision on where they're going to take their lives, because they can look at where things were before and where they are now, instead of maybe repeating a cycle that is only down spiraling. So really important that we can take what we're learning and sharing this even with the school system. If there's some way that we can teach yoga at schools, and even have maybe discussions among people, or even have discussions on Zoom among people all over the world. Okay, wow, I think that's all I've got for the presentation there. So I guess now, Simon, I'll just invite you back, and we will look at some questions that we think would come up, and then we can answer some questions later on. We can put in the comments, or if you guys put in the comments, and then we can address those later, or we could talk about some things now.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. That was really, really good to hear. I've actually heard your talk twice now, and it's been really lovely to hear it again now. So there's a lot of questions that people have, obviously, for something like this. From my perspective, and from what I've gathered from other people who have heard this information, is that people tend to ask two scenarios. There's two scenarios as I see it. One is the world stays as it is, and that, if you decide to go off-grid, there's still the possibility, as you were mentioning, of accessing technology. How would you use that technology? Are you against it? Do you think it's a bad thing to use, or should we take advantage of what's there right now? And if, say, the world changes radically and there's some major Armageddon-like situation where there's just no more internet, no more factories, then what do we do then? Obviously, that's a different scenario. Just maybe if you can speak a little bit about your ideas of how you would incorporate the situation as it is now, and maybe what might happen if the situation changed and there was no internet, there was no ability to Google things or to use, like solar panels are fantastic, but eventually they wear out. I'm not capable of making another one. I'm open to learning as much as I can, but as a physiotherapist, I'm good at bones and muscles, but not so good at building things. So you've built a whole house. And that's inspiring to me that you've done that. So maybe you speak a bit about that.
Yes, indeed. And so I think what I'm thinking is this is why it's almost like I think we need to take advantage of the resources that we have now and do things now. So, down the future, maybe things may not be accessible, like the solar panels we may not be able to afford, or not afford, but be able to even purchase them, may not even be available to buy them. And so, like I was saying before, is taking just baby steps. So if we can start, having our own compost and start to grow our own herbs and just really, really taking little steps to become more dependent on ourselves, I think is one big influence. And, like I said, right now, we have so much access to everything online. Take advantage of this now, because for all you know, if that was shut down, what would you do? And so if that did happen, well, if you had already communicated and worked with your community and you've already got the people you've sort of are almost covering those basic needs in some ways. Everything's inevitable, but I think that the more that you've taken the opportunity right now to become dependent on yourself, the less that in those cases down the future, if those things were to happen, you're more inclined to survive in a way, I would say, now. And I mean, is there anything you want to add to that, Simon?
Look, it's been really lovely living with you and picking up some of the ideas that you've had and that we've incorporated. It's, we live now on a 10-acre property, which once was a native wildflower gardens. It had a full irrigation system on it when we got the property about 20 years ago, but then we didn't live in it for the first 10 years and the irrigation system was destroyed. We can get water from the river, but it requires a big pumping system, and the pump is very old, and that takes quite a bit of effort to get it going again. I would love to be able to have a well on the property, but that would require probably digging about 150 meters down. We're growing, some vegetables, but we really need to get better at it. But whenever we try, we learn. So it's been really good trying to work with vegetables. All my life, I've been doing things like growing sprouts. All my life, for the last 40 years or so. And at some times in my life, I've had 40 different types of, I think the most I ever had was about 20 different types of sprouted grains and pulses and beans and nuts to grow. So I've been trying to make a much more sustainable food situation, even though I'm not so good at growing outside. Even someone living in a car or apartment, provided you've got access to a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of water, you can grow sprouts. And we should do maybe a whole podcast at some point about growing sprouts. Also fermenting foods, taking foods that maybe you've grown yourself or bought, and then fermenting it. It lasts so much longer if you can keep that in the fridge. You don't have to keep it in the fridge, rather. You can store up on things that you can keep outside of refrigeration. And work with a food supply. Food supply is very important. Water is very important. And then learning a little bit more about how to not be dependent so much on nighttime activities, I think, is important. You've been very good for me with this, because so much of my life in the past was always dependent on having lights to turn on when the sun goes down. Whereas really, I think a more natural way of living would be to take advantage of the daytime light and our circadian rhythms and go to bed as soon as possible when it gets dark and wake up when it's light again, as much as you can. Obviously, it depends on where you live and how long your nighttime is. But, certainly it's not that clever if you're trying to live more naturally to sleep half of the daytime when the light is out and stay up all night when the light's not out. So little things like this, I think, are important to consider. And, like Jennifer said, make as much change now as you can while we've got the possibility, so that if something were to happen, then at least you're a bit prepared. In my experience here, and you've been here when this has happened, where we've lost power. I think the most we lost power for was about 10 days. And at that time, I bought a big generator, and the generator needs maintenance regularly, so you can't guarantee it. The last time I lost power, the generator didn't work. And if the generator doesn't work, not only do you have no electricity, but in our house, we have no water because we can't, the generator is what pumps the water from our tanks to our house. And it really brings a lot to the forefront when you suddenly have no electricity and you realize, gee, how would I live like this? You can't flush the toilet, So we actually have a couple of pit toilets on the property which work a lot better than the toilets in the house. It's good to have these things. We have a septic system which works provided you don't put chemicals in it, so we're very conscious about not having chemicals in the household. We've had many friends who have died of cancer, which could have been cancer, which might have come from chemicals and things like that. So the idea of living off the grid also means being a bit healthier as well and doing sustainable activities, not sitting in chairs all day, not which can really ruin your health, not eating processed foods and chemical-laden foods, which can really ruin your health. And if your health is ruined, if you can't walk, if you haven't got the energy to move, then how are you going to live off-grid? You need constant help from external sources. So I think from my perspective, because I haven't got anywhere near the experience you've got for living off-grid and building your own house, I think it has to start from ourselves and making sure that our personal vehicles, our bodies, function well. So every day it's important to look at doing some physical activity, not being rooted to a chair all day long, not being dependent on addictive foods. So many of the foods that people think are natural foods are not. I mean, things like bread and dairy and things like this have very addictive qualities, and they have problematic things about them. So as much as possible, take care of your diet. And one of my favorite expressions is that, when you have children, you tell them eat lots to get big and strong. But once they're grown up, how much bigger you want people to get? The biggest problem we have with our health is that people tend to eat too much and not eat well. So if we can learn to just make sure that our diet is a little bit better, make food, and the only processing that should be done with food should be the stuff that we do ourselves, that's a good start. Look at your sleep is very, very important, and getting the idea of sleeping at a time when the nighttime is here and not wasting so much money on electricity, because the more you waste money on electricity, it's not so much about money. I think it's about the realization that if you had to make the electricity yourself, it's limited. Whereas I think we live in this false reality that you just pay money and electricity will come. But when you have to make the electricity yourself in a battery or with solar power or with hydropower or whatever, you realize that actually it costs more than just money that you get from putting yourself further into mortgage or borrowing more off your credit card or working in a job that may not be that nice to do. Some people, few that I know, have jobs they really like doing and they're paid money for it. But more people I know actually have jobs which they call it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, typically. But invariably, it means 2 to 3 hours of getting ready for work in the morning, 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon. And so that means 12 hours a day they're doing stuff just basically for work. And then another 5 or 6 hours they're just recovering, which basically for most people means sitting in front of a television set or a screen, recovering from being at work, and then just eating a bit of food, or maybe buying food or doing the other stuff that they need to do.
And then recouping on the weekend for the next day, which is just a cycle that just goes on, which is completely depleting ourselves and not. And that's the thing, if you are working in this field and you really enjoy your life, and if this system works for you, that's okay, that's fine, keep up with it. But when it doesn't and you're feeling inside like there needs to be a change and it's not quite right, then this is what we're offering. This is alternative ways of living, and people are doing this. So what I also want to do is make sure that I put some I'll put some contacts of people living this way, so maybe you can reach out to them, and just that's the idea, is to feel out who's doing it, how is it being done, is it working, and then that will help you find it less daunting. And the other thing I was going to mention as well is that when we're, you were talking about light and nighttime and daytime, and take advantage of daylight, is also then working in harmony with the world. Like nature is our greatest teacher, and when we're working in harmony with the earth and the nature, then it's also, we want to think about giving back to the land. So it's like when you're reaping the vegetables and the fruits and cutting down to build a home or whatever it is, using your resources, well, think about it. Well, you're going to be also giving back by planting the trees, planting shrubs, using your compost to put the nutrients back into the earth. Your poo is going back, the septic field or your compost toilet is going back to the earth. So always, honoring and giving back. And then when there's that happening, it's such a fulfilling, exciting way of living, because you just feel like you're receiving and giving, and it's beautiful. So this is the idea as well.
This is our poo. This is one of the things that I'm happy to say we've done is we have a septic toilet, and then where the septic effluent goes out, we have a banana patch, and this is what comes out. It's fantastic.
Right, and so it's giving and receiving, and this is beautiful, nice harmony that you're partaking in with the world, and the world in which we live around us it's a beautiful beautiful way of being. And so, do you think, are there any other questions you think that would come up related to this that we could address now? Or maybe what we can do is we can answer some questions and put that down later on.
I should have said, actually, in case people are just listening to this, what I put up in front of the screen
without the video
is that our septic system goes into a banana patch, and so we actually grow bananas as a result of the waste that comes out of the building. Look, there's lots of questions that might arise, and so what I'll try and do is try and edit in a little question and answer session at the end. And, we're no experts, but we've made a move towards trying to live more sustainably, and something both of us have been doing for most of our life. I don't want to be a slave to a system I'm not enjoying. So a long time ago, I elected to only do work that I enjoy, and sometimes I get paid more than other times. But I don't want to be in a system where, like many of my friends are, many of the people I know, where they work in a job they don't enjoy, and that takes 8 hours a day, and then another 4 to 6 hours a day is just getting back and forth to work, which is part of their slave system. And then to try and maintain their life, they're really not.
To pay a mortgage with high interest, then you're really only working, you're basically working 2/3 of your life, and that, the remaining is you just trying to sustain that 2/3 of work that you're not, maybe that's not soul fulfilling. And no one wants to live that way. We want to do work that is really heartfelt and is fulfilling in life. And, like I said, it's this, some people are, some people aren't, but it's, I guess this video, what we're putting out is, if you're really not feeling like it's in harmony or resonating with you, then know that there are options and there's a way out of the system. And that's what we're kind of offering, is baby steps to finding an alternative way of living.
It's worth thinking about. There is a way that might be better than what we're doing right now.
Yes.
And although you can't expect to suddenly be put into the middle of the jungle and survive, maybe we can start doing things now to make it a little bit easier, at least, to not be dependent on other people, on the government, on unsustainable things. And it actually is very, very fulfilling to be able to grow your own food, to be able to create things in your house. And my final message would be that it's got to start by looking after your own health. Make sure that you're physically capable, that your muscles and joints get movement. As a physiotherapist, the most important axiom is exercise is optional, but movement is essential. So move every joint. Also, your physiology is really important, that you have adequate energy levels and your immune system is healthy. Stay away from being fearful. Make sure you eat healthy food so that your body functions inside as well. And always remember, mentally, the most important thing to make is the choice that happiness is a choice, not something you have to wait for, and to live in fear is not a good way of living, and to, make the idea of sharing good energy and loving information inside yourself as a model for the rest of the world. And then I think life can be really fun. And if you start doing this by yourself and your small community, it makes it much easier to make the world a better place. So thank you very much for listening. Jennifer, thank you very much for coming on the program.
It's such an honor. Yes. Thanks, Simon, for having me. It was a lot of fun.
It's very wonderful to live with you and share this time with you. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.